Welcome to lecture number 7 of this series entitled Social Justice Advocacy Practical Tips from the Disability Community Experience. My name is David Lepofsky. I am a visiting professor of disability rights at the Faculty of Law at the University of Ottawa. So, where are we at now? We've figured out what our objectives are. We've figured out who our platform is or what constituency we're going to do advocacy for and with. We have figured out how to bring people together, what message we want to unite around, what our general asks are going to be, and we've taken a look at the advocacy toolkit to see what kinds of tools we can deploy in our advocacy exercise, both traditional ones and maybe some unorthodox ones. Now I want to talk about turning to the government bureaucracy, climbing the bureaucratic ladder in trying to get change. A few things that I want to offer as kind of opening thoughts. At all levels, you need to work on building relationships and building credibility in the process. You want to be able to talk to people. You want people to feel comfortable talking to you, sharing information from you with you candidly. At the same time as you are doing that, you're also always a teacher. You are always not just advocating for change, but in some way or other teaching the people you're speaking to. You can't do it obnoxiously. You've got to do it kind of delicately. But invariably, you're explaining not only what the issues are that you're dealing with and what the changes are, it could be more basic than that. I have, in my advocacy for the Accessibility for Ontarians with Disabilities Act Alliance, on many occasions met with managers, senior managers, even people in the minister's office at the ministry responsible for the Disabilities Act, or people in the premier's office, and sat down and said, hey folks, individually, would it help you if I give you just a quick primer on what the AODA requires, like what it is and how it works? I've done this so many times that one of them, who I was in ongoing contact with, later said, oh, that's your AODA 101 speech. I've done it enough that I finally decided I should record it as a video, which I call AODA 101. People appreciate that. Often people in government get a briefing from somebody further down the ladder from them, which may be wrapped up in bureaucraties. It may not be as fulsome or have the details or the focus that you'd want. So you're invariably going to be called on at some point to do this kind of thing. You're also, throughout the process of advocacy within government, constantly trying to figure out the labyrinth of the actual decision-making process. More about that in a few minutes. Here's a few things to beware and bear in mind at the outset. Government very rarely ever sends you to the person who actually makes decisions to talk to. That person may well want to keep as far away from people doing advocacy as possible. It's not unusual to be sent to some person who's got a role of stakeholder management or something like that, or someone who is lower down in the bureaucratic ladder who actually doesn't decide much, if anything. And they're the public face. They're the ones that they want to talk to you so that they can protect themselves from that. This is not a function of any particular political bent or party. I've seen this all over the place. Moreover, the person you do end up speaking to may not only not be the person in the position to actually make any decisions, but they may be relatively new in their role. It is, in my experience in government, there can be a lot of turnover. Some people have been in the role forever. Others have been in the role for 10 minutes. It's worth finding out which they are, because if they are new in the role, they may not know very much. You can also find within some public sector settings some degree of a culture of fear. And I don't mean people walking around paranoid or whatever, but in government there is, in the public service, and I know this, I've worked in the public service for 33 years as a government lawyer, there's often no reward for doing things well, but there's criticism for doing things wrong. So keeping your head down is a strategy that any number of public servants who are hardworking and dedicated find is the best strategy in their own best interest. Um, it's also not unusual, depending who you're dealing with, for the people that they send to you to meet with, um, whether it's a minister's policy advisor all the way down to a frontline policy staffer, further down in the ministry or government department you're dealing with, to present themselves as people who care a great deal for your concerns. Thank you so much for your input. It really matters. Thank you for your hard work. It's great that you're doing this advocacy, blah, blah, blah. I personally smile and tune it out so I can get to the substantive content. There are lots of public servants who really want to make the world a better place through their job or through their work in public service. There are lots of them who may feel very frustrated because they're in a large bureaucratic machine, or the government has different priorities, whatever it may be. But you may well find you're meeting with people who may feel they can't say very much, but in their heart they actually want to do something. They really want to do something more than be a cog in a huge machine. Finally, you may find out, and it is certainly not unusual, that whoever you're meeting with either has a disability or has friends and family with disabilities, and thereby has understanding of your concerns and sympathy with and supportive of your efforts. Indeed, if you get in that situation and you find out that they actually do want to help, but they're living in an environment, working in an environment where they are a cog in a small machine, they can still be very helpful for you using some of the strategies I'm going to talk about. The last thing I want to tell you about government, and this is sort of absurd, but I found this over and over, and it's often the case in large businesses too. There's no government department of good ideas. The problem with the government is, or a problem with the government is, if you come to them, or if an employee within the government has a really good idea, there's no easy way to get that to a decision maker and to get it adopted. It's my experience that the government is kind of hardwired this way, and I mean this at the political level and at the staff level. You write them or you call them and you give them an idea, their instinctive response is, let me tell you all the things we're doing that are great. If I had a buck for every time I've gotten a letter from a public servant or a cabinet minister or a deputy minister thanking us for our disability advocacy and reciting our inquiry and then saying, let me tell you all the things we're doing, not answer our proposal, just talk about what they're doing, I could, get close to retiring the national debt. I don't know if I've used that line earlier in the lecture, and if I did, sorry, it's a good line. But anyway, it is so instinctive within government, this attitude, that I actually once wrote a series of ministers, a series of inquiries about something, and in the letter said, please don't just tell us all the great things you're doing. Please tell us what you would do about X. And they still just wrote back saying, here's all the good things we're doing. I'm literally ignoring the request that they not do that. It's definitely in their DNA. So with all of this, how do you get started? I've already talked in an earlier lecture about the importance of the ask letter, the letter that goes out that says specifically what you want to ask. And that can work to at least start the government machinery going. Though what often happens, building on what I've just told you, is it goes, if it's in a minister's office, it goes to their communications people, and the communications people have no one to say, hey, this is worth doing. But they have people who will write a letter back saying, thank you for your views. And like I said, here's all the good things we're doing. So what do you do next? A strong tendency I have, or preference I have, is go to the bottom first. Don't go to the minister or the premier's office. go to the as low down in the hierarchy of the bureaucracy as you can. Um, Preferably the policy staffer or the direct operations staffer who deals with your particular issue, and try to have a conversation with them. If I'm meeting with them or on the phone with them, there's several things I do to make things easier. The first thing I do is I make it clear to them at the very outset, look, we're asking for action on this, and I know you're not the decider. I know that you didn't work in the area, and just as a public servant, it would help me if you could just explain what you folks are doing, and how it works, and so on. Um, and um, and when they talk, they will give you helpful information, or they may say that's not mine. It's someone so else that you should talk to. And at which point I'll say, I'd love to talk to them. Can you connect me with them? Because if I have an email from them, or even if they try transferring the call, it's more likely that the person at the other end is going to be willing to talk to me. I use this where I can as an avenue to discover about the hierarchy and how decisions are made, asking them what they're doing and say, by the way, if we want to advocate for this, how does this go through your ministry? Who does it go to? Who makes the decisions? What's the process? Learning that is extremely valuable. And you may not be able to find that out anywhere else. And in doing this, I ask two things. Uh, One is whose formal approval is needed, but the second thing I'll ask is who really decides this, because there could be a significant difference between the two. In some ministries, there's an assistant deputy minister with a mandate over something, and then a deputy minister, they're the senior public servant, and then they report to the minister. So you'd think everything would go from the assistant deputy minister to the deputy minister and then the minister. But I've worked in issues where, advocated in issues where essentially the assistant deputy minister reports directly to the minister's office. The deputy minister's really not. They keep them posted, but they're not really involved. I want to know that early on so I know who to spend my time working on. I also ask them when I'm going up, asking to explain the system, who really makes the decisions, but also what are the criteria, not just what are the the legal criteria, but what do they really take in mind? What's really on people's minds? So I get a sense of how best to present my case or my argument. In this kind of meeting or conversation that I'm having with this individual, I typically will offer to, I'll say, do you want me to keep you posted of what I hear and what's happening? And in public service, people are always eager to know what's going on, and often they're not told. They may be the frontline person on the issue and the last to actually learn what's going on. So I like to make it clear that it can be a two-way conversation, an exchange of information. Um, I will also keep good notes of these meetings so I know what they've said, and I may do a follow-up letter. Thank you for meeting. I appreciate your time. You told me that my best avenue is to go to blah 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 and so on. I may not. I may. It depends on the sort of whether I think that's going to be tactically helpful. Now, I've hinted at this topic. I'm now going to dive straight into it. The distinction between formal and informal power. It is absolutely vital if you're going to do effective advocacy with any organization, with present purposes, the government, to understand the lines of formal power and the lines of informal power. Who really decides and on what criteria? There can be a tendency to just look up the formal structure, figure out like who's the person who's formally in charge, and figure that's what you really need to know. But the practicality is, it may be that that's the hierarchy or structure on paper. It may be that those are the criteria in law and in public policy they apply. But it may be that there is a huge difference between that and what really happens. I've seen ministries where the director of policy, who's below the level of assistant deputy minister, who's below the level of deputy minister, is actually for all intents and purposes, the prime decider. They decide what's going to go up, and then they deal directly with the minister's office and so on. There's other places where it's not like that at all. And the informal avenue of power, the informal criteria used, may be a function of that individual. The government may have a focused stated policy priority or focus, but that individual who has the de facto informal power, they may have a different agenda, and they may be stick handling it through government the way they prefer to. I'm not suggesting that this is some sort of deep state subterfuge or stuff. It's just within their bandwidth or their authority. Different people have different priorities, different people have different agendas, and you need to know about that before you bring these forward. The informal line of authority may be completely invisible. It's not like you're going to look it up or Google it. It may well be the kind of thing that people need to tell you in conversations in these kind of meetings. And it may be that whoever you talk to thinks it's one way, but once you get higher up, you find out they were well-intentioned, but they were wrong. It can be very much like nailing jelly to a wall to try to figure out what's going on. So that's why at the start of this lecture, I said this is kind of an ongoing process of trying to figure this out. Let me give, and it may be that the informal route of process or route of decision making is actually illegal. Let me give you an example of one I know about, and but it's still being used. I mentioned in the last lecture about the kindergarten grade 12 Standards Development Committee submitting a recommendation to the government. They had to submit an interim recommendation. The government had a duty to make it public upon receiving it. That's the legislative language. But they took months to do so, so much so that I actually, at one point, brought a court application for an order forcing them to. In response, the government, by the time we got to a hearing, they'd released it. So the case was dismissed as moot, unfortunately. But we learned some pretty interesting things. The government filed an affidavit in support of that, the government's defense, saying that their process when it's time to release something to the public is that the cabinet office in the government, its communications people have to decide whether the timing of its release fits within the government's communication strategy priorities. So in other words, the minister is required by law to release it immediately upon receiving it, but cabinet office as a policy matter may just well choose to hold it up till they think the timing is best. And in that could well be to release it as a time when fewer people will even notice it. The line of authority, the informal decision-making authority, is totally a violation of the Disabilities Act. And so far, we haven't been able to do anything about it, unless you want to go litigating it at significant cost. And again, finding out that your application, by the time you get to court, is moot. It may be, and this can make it even more like nailing jelly to the wall, that the line of authority, the informal line of authority, evolves. A new minister, a new deputy minister, new people below them, and all of a sudden what used to be the line of authority, the informal line of authority and decision making, has now changed. It may be there is no one. It's just kind of chaos. It really depends on the individual organization. Did I mention it's like nailing jelly to the wall? It's kind of frustrating, but nevertheless, we got to do it. So what's the strategy for complying with the formal and informal structure or decision-making process at the same time? This is where I find working up the ladder is the best idea. Start at the bottom and then work your way up each step of the ladder if you've got time. It may be a frontline policy person or operations person, then going to their director, and then going to somebody who's over them, maybe eventually an assistant deputy minister. But it's useful to do these steps because each higher up will likely tell you, well, if you talk to the person on the front lines first, you want to be able to walk into their office and say, look, I've talked to the following people, the bottom rung of the ladder, the next rung up, the next rung. I've only been able to deal with so much, achieve so much. So let's talk. and that can be very useful. And writing a letter to the government when you want to start working up the ladder, a letter to the person on the front line may not help. Yes, we've got our initial sort of request letter out there in public, but if you want to meet with somebody, it's best if you can find someone who's already dealt with them, who could call them up and suggest that they talk to you. People get tons of email, tons of letters, and tons of requests. And if they're an overloaded public servant, you may not get a response at all. So it's best to try to figure out how to informally get to them to facilitate a formal meeting. That's why if I've been working with someone and then they move to another job, I ask them to do a personal kind of three-way call or Zoom or meeting with their successors so I can immediately rebuild the relationship I've had with them. If I'm going to a higher up person, I want to get a minister meeting, like a minister or a deputy minister, I may ask somebody who's the next rung down to help facilitate a meeting, because if it just comes in by email, it may get lost in the queue. But if an assistant deputy minister says, I really think it would be helpful, deputy, for you to meet with so-and-so, that can really help. I'll also try to find out who their scheduler is, if they have one, and contact them to see if I can sort of informally lobby them in a way that I couldn't publicly. If I want to meet with a minister, it may be a matter, if you've not been successful otherwise, of trying to track down a public event where they're speaking and walk up to them, introduce yourself, and ask for a meeting. And that may be the way around all sorts of, and you might actually say to the minister, I've been writing and asking. They may not know because they're busy and their staff are running in 12 directions, and the request went into some part of the office and didn't come out. Now, let me turn to another subject that's absolutely important to know when you're working with a government ministry. And it's something I did not know for almost a decade of doing this advocacy, actually longer. It is a common practice in government here in Ontario and in various parts of Canada for the premier or prime minister to appoint their cabinet, their ministers, and then shortly after to send each of them a mandate letter. And the mandate letter is a letter which basically says, dear minister, here are my priorities for your work over the next period of time. These don't have any sort of legal status. They're not contracts or binding, but it's the way a premier or a prime minister tries to govern and regulate and direct the way things go. For years, various levels of government a number of them were making them public. Federal government's been making them public for, I think, at least a decade. The Ontario government was making them public in the between 2010 or so and 2018. The successor government, the Ford provincial conservative government, has not made them public, and that's been the subject of quite some criticism. I had quite a revealing moment when I learned about these and about their importance. We had gotten an election commitment from a premier of Ontario at one point to take a certain action. And I went and met with the assistant deputy minister in the ministry that would be responsible for it. And I said, I'm here to talk to you about this. And here's the letter that the premier wrote us during an election campaign promising this. And the assistant deputy minister enlightened me in a way that was quite shocking. He said, look, that's a letter from a politician to a group of voters. In the public service, that has no weight. I don't know if he was overstating, but this is what he said. He said, if it's not in the mandate letter that the prime minister or in this case, the premier sends to my minister, it's not a requirement for us. And I thought, oh my God, what on earth? I was quite shocked, but it led to a new strategy. And it's an important strategy, though sadly I can't say it's a strategy that worked. But it is important to be aware of what a minister's mandate letter is. If you're going to try to get their ministry to do something, you want to be in a position to go, whether it's frontline staff or all the way up to the top, to say, this is in your mandate letter, or this is consistent with your mandate letter. What we actually did, and this was, I got to tell you, a ton of work. But at one point, I believe it was 2016, we actually, before 2016, we had written every minister in the Ontario government that had a mandate or a portfolio that covered an issue that mattered to us. And we said, dear minister, congratulations for your appointment. In the last election, the premier promised the following, which falls within your turf. We'd love to work with you on it. This is when I got letters back saying, let me tell you all the good things we're doing. They never said, okay, you're right, here's what we'll do. So the next time around, when a premier, this was a successor premier, sent out mandate letters, I think it was the successor premier, but it was before the Doug Ford Conservatives, I actually went to the premier's office and said, hey, you're going to be sending out mandate letters. And I've learned that if something's not in the mandate letters, it's treated like it's not really something that the public service has to do, even if it's in your election promise. So what we've done for you, Premier's office, is we've broken down all the commitments you made in this election, in this last election, by ministry, and asked that you put the following, copy and paste it right into your mandate letters. Premier's office thanked me very much. Frankly, they didn't. And what we did then is we analyzed each mandate letter and released a public report, 2 successive generations of mandate letters. We went through and we were able to identify, here are promises that the premier made in the election, here's the ministry it relates to, and here's what their mandate letter says or doesn't say about the promise. And overwhelmingly, our promises were left out. This, in no small part, has informed my thinking about how we better do advocacy in the future, or else what we do is in elections, we get the kind of commitments that may be great, but we never see them materialize in progress, in application. Now, that's not to say the government hasn't kept any promises and so on. It means that knowing about this mandate letter business is really important when you're doing this kind of advocacy. What do you do before you go to a meeting, whether it's anywhere on this ladder? First, in your own mind, you should set goals. What am I going to try to achieve? What do I want to walk away with? You want to let them know that that's your purpose, preferably before the meeting, so that and be proactive during the meeting in diverting them if they try to go off onto other topics. Just say, well, no, that's really important, but I'd love to meet with you to discuss that another time. I would make your case for what you're trying for. Find out what they can tell you, either if they'll tell you confidentially or things that are public record of what the governments are working for. And sometimes I've been told things like just there'll be an announcement coming soon, or this is not really, I'm not seeing anything happening, or whatever. It's useful information to have. It's worth finding out at whatever level you're at, what resistance they anticipate we might face. And that's really useful. They may well say that there have been discussions about this and there's been worry about X, or the government's heard from Y, or they might just sort of say in a gentle way, you might want to talk to so-and-so out there in the community, because it may be worthwhile for you to have seen if they have any concerns and try to adjust that. And that can be, again, very, very helpful. How do you work when you're going up the ladder with confidential tips? In other words, somebody at some point tells you, don't quote me, but X is a problem and it's coming from Y, or whatever within the government. Well, I'm not a journalist. I don't deal with confidential sources and go to jail if I'm subpoenaed and all that stuff. But what I do is I try to come up with strategies, if people tell me something, where I can address the issue without doing anything that could reveal the source. I once was told we had a particular issue, and I was told that the resistance was coming from a particular deputy minister's office. So I made an appointment to talk to the deputy minister. And I didn't say, hi, I know this is an objection that you're raising. I just went there and said, here's an issue and here's something we're really advocating on, and I'd welcome a chance to discuss it because the government's public position is X. And the deputy minister I was talking to said, oh, well, that came from me. And I was able to have a full discussion, and eventually we resolved it. And so coming up with a way to get to the people who may be the actual source of, and by the way, none of this is, discussed in public with confirming letters and so on. It was just, we have heard about you that, blah, blah, blah. It was just done as a conversation, and it worked out the problem. Let me talk to you now about specifically meeting with a cabinet minister. I've had many of these, and my experiences have evolved over time, or my approach. One thing I like to do, especially if I'm going to meet them, is write a briefing note for them. What's a briefing note? Oh, it's not got any legal status or formality, but within government, if you're going to meet with a deputy minister or minister or the premier, their staff will write a briefing note. Lepofsky's coming to talk about X, they want blah, 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 we've proposed so-and-so, whatever. Here are the landmines, whatever. But that's them writing it. So what I do, I write one of my own and send it in. I may not say briefing note. Sometimes I do. Here's our briefing note for you. I don't say, and by the way, this could be better than the sanitized one you're going to get from the public service. This is me being glib, the way I say this in the lecture. But I say it, I give the briefing in writing that I want them to get. And cabinet ministers were important yesterday, and any number of them may well find that what they are getting from the public service may be somewhat sanitized, and that they like the candor in something that's written to actually help them more constructively. I will, as part of this, or even if I don't do a formal briefing note, I will in advance send a risk of what I'm asking for. I will want, so that there's no surprises at the meeting. I don't want the minister to be able to say, oh, well, I didn't know that's what about. We're going to have to go away and talk about it. I can't really speak about that now. I also, a core part of this go up the ladder or climb the ladder. I don't go to the minister until I've gone to the earlier steps first, if I can, lower on the hierarchy, because I know what a minister is going to say to me. They're going to look at me and say, oh, you've got this concern? Well, have you talked to my policy director? Have you talked to my assistant deputy minister? And I want to be in a position actually before they even get there to say, now, minister, before I even got here, I've made a point that we have tried to resolve this coming up the ladder. And I can tell you that we've resolved a number of issues, but there are a couple of big ones that we really need ministerial direction. They need to come from you. Or I've tried to address this below, but they are not prepared to take action. This is going to need your intervention, or nothing's going to happen. And that has there's several reasons to do that. One is that it's frankly a more efficient use of your time. It also avoids the minister being able to sidestep or divert to a future meeting when you really want them to deal with something. Before I go to a meeting with a minister or even a premier, I will offer to pre-brief their policy advisor in the minister's office. I will offer to say, here's what I'm going to talk about. Here are the things we're going to raise. And number one, they always appreciate that. They seriously appreciate that because it helps them think through what advice they want to give to their minister. And they know their minister doesn't want to be caught by surprises. Number two, it can be useful because I've had the staffer, the policy staffer, say to me, well, he just had a meeting about that and he's actually thinking about blah, 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 or whatever. You can end up getting informal information that can be useful. They're not speaking out of turn, but it can be very helpful. Before I go to speak with the minister, it's wise to find out a bit about the minister's background on your issue. Have they dealt with it before? If they're a minister, but they used to be a school trustee. If you're advocating on kids with disabilities, that somebody in their family maybe has had this experience, so they would know about it personally. Not that I ever play on their personal experience. I wouldn't do that. I don't think it's wise. But it's worth at least knowing it's in their life experience, or it's not. The other thing is, in preparing for a minister's meeting, it's really important to get a sense of to know what their mindset is. And I don't mean kind of left versus right, though that's obviously going to be obvious by the party they're in, and so on. But ministers tend to be hyper-partisan. They are worried about accomplishing things that they want to accomplish, but they live in the legislature. They're used to the cut and throat of politics and all that kind of thing. So while I'm nonpartisan, I've got to be aware of the fact and alive to the fact that they're not. They have a million priorities. Often when you go there, you're not their priority. And they may be going from 3 meetings on 3 different issues to you, and then to another meeting again, and then rushing out to 3 other meetings. And they'll have a day where by the time they have dinner, they won't remember if they saw you that day. You need to really design your strategy to make it easy for them to get their mind around your issues fast. You can't assume they know anything about your issue, even if they say, I'm completely briefed and so on. It is important to understand that even though time is scarce, it's important to make use of your time, including in it, bringing them up to speed, at least on the bare minimum they have to know. Another thing about their mindset to be aware of is they're not only concerned about dealing with opposition party and dealing who they fear will blast them no matter what, and how are they going to position themselves. They don't only deal with how they're going to deal with this issue in the media. They got to deal with their own party, and their party is made up of members who are all cabinet members who are all vying for their own issues. And they've got to decide whether your issue is something they got to support, whether it's one they think they can get their colleagues on side with, and whether it's something they want to spend their own political capital on. They won't say that to you necessarily in a meeting, but you got to be aware that's part of what's going on in their minds. And unsurprisingly, again, regardless of political party. The other thing is, cabinet ministers, if they're like any I've ever met, they want to move up. They want to, if they're in a portfolio, they would love to position themselves for a better portfolio. They'd like political successes if they can. But they also, contrary to the stereotype that some people have that's quite cynical about politicians, my experience, and again, regardless of political party, whatever be their value system, in their own mind, they want to see if they can do good. They want to be able to walk away and say, I accomplished something. Now, your sense of what's good and their sense may be different, or maybe different from the opposition party, but that is a core thing that I've found about them. I let ministers know that I not only have come up the ladder before I talk to them, but it's really important for them to know that I've decided to bring to them minister level asks. I don't want them to say, well, that's the kind of detail that I don't really deal with. Go talk to my communications people or something. You got time with them, it should be minister level asks. Do not be surprised, you'll experience this with any politician, that part of retail politics is sounding sympathetic, sounding understanding, and at times they really are sympathetic and they really are understanding. That's fine. I'll listen to it. It doesn't lead me to change what I do. In other words, I got to persuade whether they sound super sympathetic or less sympathetic. I don't slow down in my advocacy efforts. If they're sympathetic, well, if you're predisposed that way, then I hope you'll find it agreeable that blah, 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 blah. Do you have any concerns about that? In other words, build on their stated sympathy because otherwise, you might later regret that you just expected too much of them because of it. One of the things I do in presenting at a meeting like this that I encourage you to consider is it's realistic to figure out beforehand, what are they going to be able to agree with? If I've got a big ask, I know that I may well know for sure that they're not going to be able to just give me an on-the-spot answer. And when I come in to the room, they may well be worried, what's this person going to ask me to do, and how do I get ready to say no or say I can't or whatever. I try to diffuse that. So it's not unusual when you have a meeting with a minister, any number of, I've said this. I said, look, I'm going to present an issue to you, and I've alerted your office to the concerns. I know you can't say yes right now, even if you do. So don't relax. Don't worry. I'm not going to say, so what are you prepared to do to make this happen? If I know that they're not going to be able to do that, even if they agree, I'm giving up nothing by saying, don't worry. I'll say, just, at the end of the meeting, I'm going to be saying, can you take this away, talk to your colleagues, and can we have a follow-up meeting, in 3 weeks or something? That often creates a real sense of kind of, that we can now have the discussion, and they're thinking in terms of what I'm going to ask rather than having to have their brain racing on how they just say no or no, I can't or whatever. There are times, and it's not universal, that in a meeting I will say to them right at the start, Minister, I just want to explain that I'm going to impose a rule on myself. You're not asking for it, but I'm not going to tell anybody what you said here. So I don't want you to worry I'm going to be tweeting or whatever. I want you to be able to ask me candidly or say candidly whatever you want, because what your position is going to be is what you put in writing or what you state on the record for the government, in the legislature, in a news release, whatever. This is important to me for a couple of reasons. One, it relaxes them. Number two, I want them to feel that they can be candid. I've got to earn their trust. But I also want I want there not to be a worry that talking to me is somehow like talking to a news reporter, that everything you say is going to get out there. And I have found I've got to earn their trust. I can't assume they're going to believe me. In fact, I've said to them, look, you don't necessarily come into this room trusting me to do that, but I can tell you, if you talk to any of your cabinet colleagues, this is the way I've been. And if I'm going to be otherwise, I'll let you know, and so on. And I found that too can create a warmer conversation. Does it lead to the fact that there may have been things said at some of these meetings that, had I made them public, could have been quite dramatic and used in arguments about whether something that should be done wasn't being done? Absolutely. But am I good to my word? Absolutely. The benefits of making this commitment to me, I've found, way outweigh the lost opportunities. Now, there's one other thing to be alive to in preparing for a meeting like this. You got limited time. Plan the time accordingly, and make sure that you don't end up talking for 29 of the 30 minutes and then have the minister say, well, thank you very much, and I look forward to talking to you in another time. You got to make sure that you're ready to make your presentation part very briefly. I am a consistent violator of that rule. If the minister, there are times, and it's on occasion, where a minister really does want to talk to you about this, doesn't want to get involved, and their solution is kind of a filibuster. Let's try to strike. Well, David, you're doing wonderful work, and can you tell me about what else you're doing about it? I saw an article about you in the paper about blah, blah, blah. I was very concerned about that issue. Can you tell me more about it? And I have to be in a position to very quickly say, Minister, I'm happy to provide you, to discuss that with you another time. And it is very important, but I'm here to discuss this particular issue. And if we could just deal with that now, I'd be delighted as soon as we leave to book a time to talk to you about that other thing. so that they can't eat up the time. Now, let me turn to planning the meeting specifics. Um, I want to focus my meeting on actual results, and therefore, not only at the start do I want to make it clear what I'm asking for, but at the end, I need to be ready to ask for certain specific things. When can we meet again? Who should I talk to follow up? And how long do you think you need before you can get back to me on next steps? And you want to be able to say that and say, I'm going to confirm that in writing. Is that okay? Because while the content of the meeting can be kept confidential, I want them to know that with their agreement that those things are clarified and that they're mutually understood. Um, um, it's very important to know who you should follow up with, because otherwise you leave the room and you spend your time chasing very busy people who aren't necessarily the right person to take it on. I generally proceed on the basis that I don't want any surprises. I don't want them surprised by anything I say. I want them it all to have been made clear before I get there, because then I can drive to the content that matters. What do I do to follow up on the meeting? One important question is, do I bring anybody else to the meeting? Often I don't, because I want a candid exchange, and I don't want them sort of looking at the rest of the people in the room and figuring they better be worried about what they may think of them. I have brought law students with me on an understanding that I say I'm making this commitment of confidentiality, and that extends to my students. On the one hand, the advantage of bringing other people is it counteracts the sense of this is all just one person. On the other hand, and it can again further humanize the issue by them seeing that there's a range of us who are equally concerned about this. The downside is I have been at meetings like this where the minister tries to play things off. Well, David, thank you very much. I appreciate your 2 minutes of opening. Now I'm going to ask each of the other people to speak. And there you end up. If I was coordinating and planning to handle the meeting, and the others were there to watch, I've lost that opportunity. I did have a wonderful situation where that a minister tried that, but it backfired. Back in an earlier lecture, I talked about in 1998, the Mike Harris conservative government was doing a closed invitation-only consultation on what a disabilities act should include. We got a meeting with the minister. I decided to bring a table full of people. I think there was about 10 or 12 people. And I walked in and I gave the opening remarks, and the minister began by exactly what I just said a minister might do. Well, David, thank you very much, and I'd love to hear from each of these people. And I smiled and I said, well, that's great, because that's exactly how we planned our presentation. And then from then on, each person made about a 3-minute presentation that we had coordinated and planned together. Their attempt to get around our plan didn't work. Let's talk now about the follow-up letter. After a meeting with a minister, and if I made a commitment of confidentiality, I want to honor it, but I do want to write a letter to follow up saying we did meet. If I had provided in advance certain things that I can disclose that I presented, I will reiterate those in the letter, but I'm not quoting them unless they've agreed that I can say something. Like the follow-ups, I might say you agreed, if they've agreed that I can do this, that you've agreed to talk to your colleagues, get back to me by a certain date, and then we can have a follow-up meeting. After a meeting, and that letter serves several functions. It confirms we did. It can be copied to other public officials, like the Premier's office, to let them know what's going on, and to others in the ministry to let them know, like the deputy minister, assistant deputy ministers. I can flip it to even the frontline people who I initially met with to keep them in the loop about what's going on. Because remember, you want to build that relationship. Also, send it out to as an AODA Alliance email update, so our supporters know that this step has been taken. Um, Another step after the meeting is to offer to debrief the minister's policy advisors or the deputies or policy advisors. Let's talk about follow up. If I'm going to have a meeting with a premier, which I've done a number of times over the years, I've actually, before I go for a meeting, I make sure I've talked about these issues with the minister so I can tell the premier, don't just send me back to the minister, I've talked to them. But before I go to meet the premier, I will tell the minister's policy advisors, if you'd like a briefing, I'll tell you, I'm meeting the minister tomorrow or the premier tomorrow. Let me tell you what I'm going to be talking about. Everybody likes knowing what's going on, and it's helpful to offer that. And you never know in those conversations what tidbits you can learn as people are talking to you. Let me offer a quick strategy about the risk of divide and conquer. Since I began doing this advocacy over 3 decades ago, I've encountered on occasion governments at some level or other who try a divide and conquer strategy. Sometimes I think it's malintended. Sometimes I think it's just a genuine effort to figure out what they should be doing, and it's not malintended at all. But in any case, I am troubled by it. I have had government, for example, to ask us at certain points, well, tell us what the 3 major barriers are that we should be fixing first. Now, it's not unusual at all to rank order priorities when you're speaking to government. So the request is not of itself an unfair request, but that doesn't mean that we accept it on faith. When we were lobbying for the Disabilities Act, and they said, well, what are your 3 priorities for the Disabilities Act? Tell us, which disabilities or what areas of activities. And we decided we're not getting caught up in that because its effect would be divide and conquer, even if it wasn't meant as such. I didn't want people in wheelchairs fighting for ramps, not stairs, to be positioned adverse to people who are deaf seeking sign language or captioning. So the solution was go back to our uniting term, the mirror in which we see all our experience, and that is barrier. We said we are united in needing a law that's going to remove all barriers and that's going to achieve a barrier-free society for all people with disabilities. And then we'll have effective enforcement. That's our priority. So all barriers, all disabilities, effective enforcement. There are the 3. See what I've done? I've given them 3, but it isn't, is autism more important than kids with autism going to be our priority or kids with intellectual disability? That kind of divisiveness is really harmful for us, really harmful for social justice advocacy generally, and frankly, to me, just unacceptable. But it's important to be proactive in mounting a strategy. One strategy that I find effective, if there's a way to get it to happen, and it's not easy, is what, for want of a better term, I would call a 3-corner meeting. I would love, government has a tendency to meet with either disability sector advocates or obligated sector advocates. If it's transportation, it's the providers of public transit, or if it's education, the school boards, the teachers' unions. Some politicians, I dare say, and I don't want to say most or all, but some have made it a tactical decision to keep us apart because they can best manage the process, and also because they can then talk to each as if they're the champion for them and protecting them from the other. My experience is it's best when we're all in the room together. When we were developing, or when we were advocating for the Accessibility for Ontarians with Disabilities Act in 2003 and 2004, when a new premier had been elected, Dalton McGuinty, for the Liberal Party, and he'd committed to this legislation, committed to it complying with the principles that we got approved by the legislature in October of 1998 in a resolution we fought for and won. He appointed a minister to lead the activity named Marie Butriani. Marie Butriani had been worked as a child psychologist for years. This was a real adventure for her. I'd never met her before. Worked very well together with her over time. But she decided to do a roundtable of stakeholders. I went to this meeting, and there were representatives from the disability community, from the business community, from the colleges and universities, municipalities, public transit. And I don't think anybody agreed to confidentiality terms, and I don't think we were asked. But on a handshake, we just went in and talked. And she sat down at the start and began by saying, the Premier wants this legislation. He wants it to be bold. I want to talk to you all about what we can find common ground about what it could include. And what was really interesting is how much common ground she found. And there were some at that table who I think had stereotypes about us as being kind of draconian and having excessive demands. But as we talked to each other, we found that those stereotypes were disappearing. The other thing I found is at this and other meetings is that when you get to this kind of setting, people who in separate rooms might have exaggerated senses of what we want, once we're sitting at the table, are more inclined to lean forward and say, so can you explain again what it is you're looking for? And then we have the opportunity to make the pitch. And then Dr. Butriani was in a position to see how much common ground there was. And that's what resulted in the content of the legislation. I remember talking to her after and saying, like, this is, it was amazing how for years under the prior government that had been treated as if this was something that could never happen. And now we did it once and it was actually effective. Let me give you another example. So go back to 2010. The Ontario government was committed to enact an information and communication standards accessibility standard under the Accessibility for Ontarians with Disabilities Act. It would set requirements to remove and prevent barriers in various areas of information and communication. That included requirements for website accessibility. And a proposal was before the government. They announced that they were going to set these web accessibility guidelines, but only at a certain level, level A. Details don't matter for this. We wanted them to go to level AA, which would have been a higher standard. And there was a debate whether the Standards Development Committee had recommended A or AA, whatever. The minister initially was going to dig in and say, no, I'm just sticking with A. And I said to the minister at the time, why don't you do one of these three-corner meetings? Why don't you call together some of us from the disability community and some folks from the IT community, and why don't we try to talk it out? And we did. In fact, the assistant deputy minister at the time chaired it, and it was really interesting. There were big players there like Intel and IBM and Microsoft and so on. And we, again, I don't believe a non-disclosure agreement was signed, but it was kind of on a handshake. We're just here to try to solve the problem. And what we ended up finding out was that, again, there was a lot of common ground. There was one or two sticking points. And of those sticking points, but otherwise they could go to level AA and the government would be comfortable with it. And I ended up saying to the government, look, at the meeting, if you go to AA with these couple of exceptions, my formal position will be it's an important step forward, but this exemption, we don't like this exemption, but I'm not going to make an issue out of it. And I'm not going to go public and sort of beat the drums about it. And they decided that was a worthwhile deal. And we didn't sign anything. It was just, again, on a verbal equivalent to a handshake. And they ended up making the change. And it was a good deal for us. And the part of it that I'm troubled by have since been, it doesn't matter because in a lot of ways, circumstances and technology have superseded it. Now that standard needs desperately to be updated, but that's not part of this particular problem. Um, Strategies in dealing with government to show that we are together. Earlier in this conference, in this series, I talked about the realistic goal of harmony, not unanimity, but there are ways to depict um, um, a strong sense of shared dedication to our goal. And back when I was talking earlier about them trying to get us to set priorities, which could have played us like off against each other, I was happiest when we would end up with a person with hearing loss who talked about the importance of Braille. They don't use Braille. And a person who uses a wheelchair talking about the importance of sign language. They don't use sign language. And a person like me who's blind talking about the importance of having ramps for people using wheelchairs. I can walk. The compelling nature of that is not only that the concept of barrier is one that we all see our experiences in and reflects the problem we need to solve, but it also showed that we united together, that we were together, that there was common ground. Those kind of strategies, even if they're not headliners, can be really powerful. Let me talk to you finally about the brief to government. I've talked earlier in an earlier lecture about this, and I'm not going to repeat stuff. I'm going to be a little more focused here. There are 3 stages in speaking to government where the brief can be persuasive and be helpful. The first is, and this is very much comparable for those practicing law or learning to study law, very much analogous to the 3 stages that a brief, or what we in Canada call a factum, play in the persuasion process in a court proceeding. Stage 1 for the brief is before you appear before some legislative committee or a government official, a minister or whoever. It's before they read it. It's to people who don't know anything about what you are trying to achieve. It is there to introduce them to your position and make your case. So by the time they meet you, they are already aware that you've got a persuasive argument, and if possible, that you're alive to possible counter arguments, and you've got answers for them. The second phase where it has its role to play is when you actually have the meeting with the minister or the public official, or appear before the legislative committee. I'll be talking more about legislative committees in the next lecture. But it's there where you can, not that they're going to be reading it top to bottom while you're there, but you can either refer to it or point to it while you're speaking and say, now you might be concerned about somebody arguing that nobody's ever done this before, but here on page 3, you'll see we list all the different jurisdictions that are doing that, and there are hyperlinks to people who will tell you that it works really well. So that's the second stage. It helps you be more efficient when you're meeting with the minister, the parliamentary committee, the public official. The third use of it is after. You've met with them, you've finished making your presentation, you've met with the committee or the public servant. After you leave, what do they have? They have their notes from the meeting, however legible they are. They have their memory of the meeting, and they still have your brief. So it should speak to them at that stage as someone who's been fully apprised of your ideas, who's been able to hit you with hard questions. And I love when ministers at meetings hit me with hard questions. That's part of the good work of doing advocacy. The same way when I'm in courtroom, I love when judges challenge me on the argument I'm making, because it gives me a chance to understand what's on their mind and gives them me a chance to respond to it. So the brief can fill all of these functions. It also, in the persuasion process, at the same time, it can serve several other important roles. After you've gone through a common ground building process, it can be something that you can send out to your community. They can see that you've made the arguments that your coalition said they're going to make. if it says it all, it means they can then write government and say, we agree to. They don't have to do any of that research, or they can add their own points. It also becomes a historic record. You post it, you say, this is what we asked of the government. If they don't deliver something in 2 years, or if they deliver something that doesn't have what you want and it doesn't work, you go back to that earlier brief and say, hey, look, we've already done the research. This is what we've asked for. We tried it once your way. Are you game for a rematch? Can we do this the right way this time? And that could be very constructive. When I'm structuring a brief, especially if I'm going to a parliamentary committee or government, I have some key ingredients. I've talked to them about this to some extent in an earlier lecture, but let me crispen it up this way. I set out who we are, what the problem is, and then I list my recommendations. And under each recommendation, I give an explanation. Here's the problem. The best way to approach it is this. We therefore recommend that. And put the recommendation, again, not in legislative language, but in plain language that's hopefully intuitively persuasive and appealing. I then gather all the recommendations together in an appendix and put them there. So in the appendix, they will have the good fortune that they can, if they don't want to wade through your whole brief, and some of my briefs are not brief, they can just look to the list of recommendations, and they may all just be there in a page or 2 or 3. When I'm writing one of these, I use a lot of headings. I find it's helpful to have a lot of headings because otherwise it may be long, it's easy. And the headings, for me, should each make points. People with disabilities living in poverty. Provincial benefits never live up to, or never bring above poverty line. Whatever. They're almost like little mini headlines, but they're like each, you don't want to read the detail between these headings? All you got to read is the heading and it makes the point. The headings, once you're finished, you can gather together, and that's called your summary up top. And I like a summary, which I write at the very end, to be sufficiently clear that even if somebody doesn't want to read the rest of the brief at all they got to read is the summary, and they've really got the idea. That is especially useful if you're going to share this with the media, who may not want to read all the details. So with all of these ideas in mind, we've climbed the ladder. What happens if we have to go to the legislature? What if we are going to be involved in presenting to a parliamentary committee, or in Ottawa in Canada, or a legislative committee in a province, or a municipal city council, or where they have them a school board to propose a change? What's the deal about that, and how do you navigate those systems? That is what we will talk about in the 8th lecture. We'll see you there.